The wedding feast was a spectacle of gold and cruelty, just as Joffrey liked it. Sansa sat in her usual silence, dressed in ivory and blue, a ghost among lions. The chandeliers above gleamed like stars, but the shadows around her were thicker than they had ever been. Since her father's execution, since her mother's body was thrown into the river, since her brother's head was sewn onto his direwolf. Sansa had stopped dreaming of escape. She had started dreaming of justice, and on this day, justice was on the table. Literally. Ser Dontos had handed her the hairnet that morning. A gift, he'd whispered drunkenly. A wedding favor. But Sansa saw more than silks and stones. She had read between the threads, understood the subtle gleam of the single black gem nestled in the net, the one that hadn't been there before, the one that didn't match the rest. A gem with no shimmer. A gem that whispered opportunity. So she smiled, gently, politely, and wore it. The feast dragged on. Joffrey mocked Tyrion as usual, pouring wine like a fool king. He had his dwarves reenact Robb's death to laughter and applause. Sansa clenched her teeth through it all, her hands on her lap, her eyes downcast. She counted her breaths. One for father, one for mother, one for Robb, one for the girl she used to be. Joffrey raised his cup again. Sansa, he drawled, slurring just enough to show he was tipsy but not stupid. My sweet dove, fetch me more wine. And be quick, unless the northern air has frozen your manners. The hall laughed. Even Margaery gave a tight smile. Sansa stood. Her fingers didn't tremble. Not anymore. Not even when she passed behind Tyrion, who didn't look up. She saw the subtle glance from Ser Dontos near the pillars. Just one nod. She reached the wine. The decanter was full. She unscrewed the small gem from the hairnet and let it fall. A light click, nearly silent. It dissolved instantly, just as promised. A poison so rare that even the maesters in Old Town couldn't name it, not unless they'd tasted it. And once they had, they were dead. Sansa walked slowly back, a silver goblet in hand. Joffrey looked at her with that smug curl in his lips. He never imagined she could be more than decoration, a broken bird with pretty hair, a thing to humiliate and parade. He would never imagine this. She handed him the cup. He grabbed it, not with thanks, but with insult. About time, he muttered, then turned to take another bite of pigeon pie, then a sip, then another. She walked away before it started. The sound was subtle at first, a cough, then a choke, then the shatter of a goblet hitting the stone floor. Silence stretched through the wedding hall like a blade. Joffrey clutched his throat, his eyes wide, bloodshot, foam spilling from his lips. He staggered. Hands reached for him. The queen screamed. Tyrion stood up fast. Margaery backed, away, knocking over her wine. The boy king fell, and Sansa, standing just a few steps from the chaos, watched him die. His eyes found hers in the last seconds. Perhaps he saw something in them. Perhaps he knew. She hoped he did. His mouth opened, but no words came out, only blood. Then he stopped moving. The silence cracked. Panic spread like fire. Cersei screamed for guards. Mace Tyrell shouted for maesters. Someone accused Tyrion. Someone else shouted that it was the food. But Sansa? She slipped away in the confusion, slid out through a servant's corridor she had memorized long ago. She didn't need Ser Dontos this time. Her hands didn't shake. Her breath was steady. For the first time in years, she felt something like peace. She had killed a king. Now the war would begin. The night wrapped itself around the Red Keep like a noose. Panic had broken the wedding into fragments, guests scrambling, screaming, accusing. Cersei's sobs had turned to fury in seconds. Tyrion was already seized by the King's Guard, his goblet still untouched and forgotten on the floor. But no one noticed the Stark girl vanish, Not in the chaos, not yet. Sansa moved quickly, with the calm of someone who had rehearsed this 1,000 times. Down stone corridors and through kitchen halls, still heavy with the smell of roast and spiced wine. She removed her hairnet, tucked it deep into a bread basket, and slipped through a side gate left propped open by Ser Dontos hours ago. He waited for her at the end of the narrow pier by the Blackwater Rush. "You did it," he breathed, eyes wider than ever, cheeks flushed with drunken fear. "Gods be good, Sansa. You really—" "Boat," she said. He blinked, then nodded. Right, come on, before they start putting it together." The small boat rocked as she climbed in. The city behind them buzzed like a wounded animal, torches flaring, bells ringing. But they moved quickly under the moonlight, quiet oars cutting through dark water. Sansa didn't speak. She just stared ahead, her mind already moving faster than the tide. She had done it. She had killed Joffrey. But now came the part no one had taught her: survival. They reached the ship just before midnight. A smuggler's galley paid with Lannister coin stolen weeks before. Ser Dontos passed off her identity as a northern merchant's bastard. She said nothing. Her face stayed shadowed beneath a hood. She didn't trust Dontos, never had, but she had needed him. That need was now over. As they boarded, she whispered to one of the guards in the crew, slipped him a coin, and pointed to Dontos. "He has a bounty on his head," she said softly. "Half the Red Keep is looking for him. He knows too much." The guard hesitated, then gave a small nod. Before the ship pushed off, Ser Dontos was nowhere to be seen. She didn't ask what they did with him. She didn't care. Back in King's Landing, the Lannisters were tearing each other apart. Cersei had collapsed into madness, screaming for Tyrion's head. Varys stayed silent. Tywin, though burning with fury, showed nothing but ice. He ordered half the city locked down, guards at every gate, and sent ravens to every corner of the realm. But even he hadn't expected what came next. By morning, a piece of parchment was found nailed to the doors of the Sept of Baelor, written in a soft but unmistakable northern hand. "He killed my father. He slaughtered my brother. He laughed at my mother's death. I gave him justice. Sansa Stark of Winterfell, Queen Slayer." The city woke to that name on every tongue. The Abdei, Queen Slayer. The Stark girl they all forgot. The wolf in the lion's den. In the north, word traveled slower, but it landed harder. Jon Snow heard it from a letter smuggled to Castle Black. His hands shook when he read it. Arya, still across the sea, only learned it weeks later from a whisper in a Braavosi tavern. The Red King choked on justice, served by a little bird, with wolf's blood. And in the snow-covered halls of the dying Night's Watch, Sam Tarly whispered, "She did it. She actually did it." But no one felt the quake more than Baelish. Pater had been watching, scheming, thinking he alone held the keys to Sansa's mind. That he could shape her future, marry her off, make her his perfect pawn. But now the pawn had moved on its own and made the first kill on the board. "She killed him," he muttered in disbelief. "She killed him without me." That changed everything. The ship that carried Sansa sliced across the narrow sea, bound for Braavos. But she had no plan to stay. Braavos was only the first step. The whispers would follow her, as would the reward on her head. But so would the fear. And fear, she was learning, was power. She stood at the deck, watching the sea stretch endlessly before her. For the first time in her life, she was not someone's daughter, not someone's prize, not someone's prisoner. She was the Queen Slayer, and she was far from finished. The ship reached Braavos just before dawn, its hull scraping against the docks like a quiet threat. The fog was heavy, casting the port in shadows, and the sea reeked of salt and fish and secrets. Sansa stepped off the boat alone, her cloak pulled. Tight, her eyes sharp. She looked less like a girl running and more like a woman returning from war. The captain didn't ask questions. That's why she paid him double. Braavos was a city that didn't care about names. It cared about gold, masks, and silence. For Sansa, that was perfect. The tale of the Queenslayer hadn't spread here yet. Not in full. There were murmurs, yes, whispers of a dead boy king and a vanished northern girl. But to Braavosi ears, it was just another Westerosi mess. She rented a room in a brothel, not for the services, but for the anonymity. No one asked why a young woman traveled alone with a blade hidden in her boot and coin in her purse. No one dared. The madam, a grizzled old woman named Randa, liked her immediately. "You don't blink like the others," she said, puffing, from a long pipe. "Been through fire, I reckon." "Something like that," Sansa replied. She didn't sleep that first night. She sat at the window staring out at the Titan of Braavos. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her sleeve, where she'd sewn a tiny scrap of direwolf fur, the last thing she'd taken from Winterfell. It reminded her that even though her body was here, her story wasn't done. By the end of the week, she was training, not with blades. Not yet. She wasn't Arya. She didn't want to fight like a shadow. Sansa fought differently. She asked questions, observed everything, mapped out faces, alliances, power. She started visiting courtyards where the bankers whispered politics and the sailors drank to loose tongues. She learned who sold secrets, who bought them, and who killed for them. In the house of black and white, they wouldn't take her. "You seek justice, not nothingness," the man at the door told her. "You wear your name like armor." He was right. She didn't want to become no one. She wanted to become Sansa, Stark again, only different, stronger, deadlier. So instead, she found her way to the underbelly of the city. Hired a sellsword, a one-eyed Lyseni who owed too many debts, and offered him double to teach her how to defend herself. Dagger first, then poison, then strategy. By the second month, she could disarm him in 2 moves. "You ain't no lady," he muttered, bruised and panting after one of their lessons. "No," she said, "not anymore." But she couldn't hide forever. One morning, she woke to find a letter slipped under her door. No name, just 3 words. "Littlefinger is coming." Her blood turned to ice. She had suspected he might find her. She hadn't expected it this soon. That same night, she left the brothel and changed inns. She burned the dress she'd arrived in. She dyed her hair dark with ink made from walnut bark. She bribed a Braavosi boy to spread rumors that she'd been seen boarding a ship to Myr. Misdirection, lies. Littlefinger's favorite game. And now hers, too. When he did arrive 2 days later, she watched from a rooftop. Pater Baelish. Looked the same, smug, smooth, dressed in muted power. He paid men in alleyways, flirted with women at the harbor, and smiled at everyone with that snake-coiled smirk. But she didn't approach him. Not yet. She wanted to see what he'd do without her leash. That night, she followed him to a private inn at the edge of the Black Canal, waited until he dismissed his guards, slipped in through the back, blade drawn, face covered. He turned when he heard her behind him, slowly, as if he'd been expecting her. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said. She didn't speak, just pressed the blade gently to his throat. "Poison was clever," he went on. "Messy, but poetic. I'm impressed. You've grown so—" "I should kill you," she said coldly. "But you won't," he smiled, not flinching. "Because I can still help you. I always helped you, Sansa. You sold me to monsters. I taught you how to survive them." The knife stayed where it was. Her hand didn't shake. But inside, something else twisted. A war between old fears and new power. Between the girl who once trusted him and the woman who now hunted alone. "You'll leave Braavos," she said. "Tonight. You'll take your spies, your lies, and go back to the filth you crawled from. If I see your face again, I won't hesitate." Baelish didn't blink, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "You've become very dangerous." "I learned from the best," she whispered. Then she left him, the blade still clean, but her power proven. She didn't look back. Sansa Stark had changed her name, changed her story, changed her fate. But now, it was time to go home. Winterfell waited, and the wolves were ready to return. The ship that carried her back to Westeros was smaller, older, not the kind used by lords or merchants. It smelled. Of salt and tar, the sails patched with mismatched cloth, the crew mostly silent, perfect, quiet and invisible, just as she needed. Sansa stood at the bow with her hood up and her hands folded, watching the coast of the Vale come into view like a memory, clawing back from the dark. She hadn't planned to return this way. She had dreamed of Winterfell. Yes, of its stone, walls and the cold that felt like home. But the north was still burning with chaos. Boltons held her family's seat now. The Lannisters had propped them up like lapdogs, and the rest of the bannermen had scattered like frightened deer. She needed to move carefully, not like a wolf, but like a shadow. And Petyr Baelish had left her a perfect path, even if he didn't know it. She arrived at the bloody gate under a false name, Ellen Stone, daughter of a fallen knight. The guards in the Vale didn't question much. The war in King's Landing had exhausted them. Lords were tired. Soldiers were scattered. No one looked too closely. And the Eyrie, still ruled by a mad boy and his ambitious mother. Lysa Arryn was less mad than she was desperate. Desperate for affection, for power, for control. And when her niece returned to her in tears and clever lies, she welcomed her like a long-lost treasure. "Oh, my sweet Sansa, my little dove," she whispered through clenched teeth and perfume. "You're safe now. You're with family." Sansa smiled sweetly, said all the right words, and waited. Lysa, of course, knew nothing of the murder. She had heard Joffrey had died, but no one had yet dared to whisper how outside of King's Landing. To her, Sansa was just a frightened girl who had narrowly escaped the lions, a little bird who needed a cage, but Sansa had no plans to stay caged again. She spent her days walking the high halls of the Eyrie, learning the guards' names, watching the routines. She soothed little, lured Robin with honeyed words and practiced smiles. When Lysa raged or wept, she was there with gentle hands and quiet comfort. And slowly, without anyone noticing, she began to shift the weight of the household. Maids came to her for instructions instead of Lysa. Guards bowed slightly lower. Letters were brought to her for review. The little bird had become the lady of the Vale. Even Petyr, when he returned, noticed it. He arrived unannounced one misty evening, cloaked in his usual smugness. But this time she didn't go running to him. She met him in the great hall, her chin high, her voice calm. "Lord Baelish," she said, "you've been gone long." He studied her. "You've changed again. I've remembered who I am." That night, he tried to test her again, with soft words, with veiled threats, with promises of marriage and power. She listened, she nodded, and she smiled. But when he reached to touch her hand, she pulled away. "I'm not yours to guide anymore," she said. "I never was." The next morning, Lysa Arryn was dead. They said she slipped through the moon door in a fit of madness, whispered that grief for her late husband and jealousy over Baelish's attention drove her over the edge. Only 3 people knew the truth, and Sansa wasn't about to tell the other 2. Now the Eyrie was hers, not in name, not yet, but in function. Robin adored her, the lords respected her, and Petyr had lost control. Again, Sansa Stark had taken her second kingdom. No blood on her hands, no blade in her palm, just a fall, a scream, and silence. But she wasn't done. She stood on the balcony of the Eyrie one night, looking northward. Past the clouds, past the mountains. Winterfell was still in Bolton hands. Ramsay Snow, the bastard who flayed men and broke women. She had heard the stories. The North groaned under his name. And yet, she smiled. Because she had faced monsters before, kings and creeps and cowards. And Ramsay would learn something soon. The wolves hadn't all died. Some of them just learned how to wait. Snow fell heavier the closer she got to Winterfell, thick and endless, like the gods were hiding the world beneath a blanket of silence. The cold cut deeper here. It wasn't like the chill of King's Landing or the wind in Braavos. This was northern, cold. It seeped into your bones. It made you remember where you came from. Sansa didn't travel openly. She rode under the name Lady Ellen, protected by 3 men sworn to House Arryn, or at least paid well enough to say so. They didn't ask questions, and she didn't offer stories, but every step they took northward felt heavier, not with fear, but with memory. Every stream, every grove, every patch of snow-covered road whispered with the voices of her childhood, of her mother's warnings, Arya's laughter, Robb's teasing, of home, except Winterfell wasn't home anymore. The banners that flew above its towers now were red and black, the flayed man of House Bolton. Stark blood had soaked into those stones, and yet their enemies had taken it, twisted it, claimed it. Ramsay Snow ruled here now, or as he called himself, Ramsay Bolton, legitimized by Lannister decree. Bastard turned lord, mad dog turned master. Sansa had heard everything. The skins on the walls, the hunting games with women, what he did to Theon, what he enjoyed doing. Monsters like Joffrey didn't die. They simply passed the sickness to someone else. But she hadn't come to be frightened. She had come to kill. She sent the first, Raven from a tavern 2 days' ride outside Winterfell. It bore no name, no seal, just a note scrawled in a careful, controlled hand. The North remembers. She is coming home. By the time she sent the second, she had arrived at a nearby village. The snow was so deep now, the horses struggled to move. But she didn't stop. She walked through the market, quiet as a shadow, listening. Whispers had already begun. Did you hear? The girl who killed the king, she's a Stark. Some say she was seen in the Vale, some say in White Harbor. Maybe she's dead already. No, she's coming back. I heard it. The wolf girl. The Queen Slayer. Sansa let the rumors grow. Rumors were like seeds. Give them warmth, let them spread, and soon even the Boltons would hear them. And they'd start to worry. She made sure of it. More ravens, more messages carved into trees and left behind in snow. Even an old Stark banner hung from a tree one morning just outside a patrol route, just enough to rattle a soldier's sense of safety. And then she walked into Winterfell, alone. Dressed in furs and shadow, her face lowered, her name false, but her steps unshaken. Ramsay didn't recognize her. Not at first. He was holding court in the great hall, barking orders, threatening, servants laughing like a dog gnawing on a bone. He sat in her father's chair, his feet sprawled out like a king. Sansa stood at the back of the room until he noticed her. And then she raised her eyes. There was something in that look that made even Ramsay hesitate. Something cold. Something ancient. Something stark. She didn't flinch when he stood, didn't blink when he walked toward her. Well, well, he said, voice mocking but cautious. You must be mad, girl. Walking in here like this? She smiled just slightly. I've been called worse. I thought you'd be smaller, he said, the Queen Slayer herself, the pretty little dove that choked a lion. And here you are, back to be my bride. Is that it? You're not half the man Joffrey was, she said. The hall went quiet. Ramsay grinned, but his eyes twitched. And look how well he ended up. Sansa stepped forward. Just one step, but her voice cut through the air like a sword. He died choking on poison. With my eyes, the last thing he saw. Would you like to know what your death will feel like? His hand twitched toward the dagger on his belt. But behind Sansa, the doors creaked open. 20 men entered. Quiet, cloaked, armed. Not sellswords, not Lannisters, Northern men. The Mormonts had come, the Hornwoods. Even old Lady Dustin sent steel. The North hadn't forgotten. They'd waited, and now they had returned. Not for a lord, not for a prince, but for a wolf. Ramsay tried to fight. He screamed, raved, ordered his guards to seize her. None moved. He was dragged from her father's hall. Not by strangers, but by the people he'd ruled over with flayed, fists, and sick games. Sansa didn't watch him die. That part she left to the North. Let them bury their hate in his blood. She had done enough killing. But when she stood again at the ramparts of Winterfell, snow swirling around her like falling ash, she finally whispered the words she'd been holding back for years. I'm home. Winterfell was hers again. Not by birthright alone, but by blood. Strategy and fear, the North bent not to a crown but to a memory of a young girl taken, tortured, returned. A girl who had become the Queen Slayer, a Stark who had stopped waiting for heroes to save her. And now she stood in the great hall where her father once judged honor and treason, where her mother walked in grace, where Robb once wore his crown and dreamed of peace. It was colder now. Quieter, but hers. The ravens flew from Winterfell for days, short messages, specific names. One to White Harbor, one to Deepwood Motte, one to Bear Island, signed not as a noble, but with a wolf's paw drawn in ink and blood. She didn't ask for pledges. She demanded truth. Who would stand for the North? Who remembered the Red Wedding? Who had bent knee to the Boltons, the Freys, the Lannisters, and now pretended it meant nothing? Those who replied with excuses were marked. Those who replied with silence were marked deeper. And those who pledged, truly pledged, were summoned. The lords began arriving in early spring, slow and cautious. First came the Mormonts, led by a girl no older than 10 with fire in her eyes and a blade at her side. Then the Risewells, quiet but loyal. Even some Karstarks returned, tails tucked, offering men and coin. Each swore fealty not to a king, nor a southern crown, but to Sansa. She didn't hold court the way Ned had. She didn't ask them for advice. She told them what would happen. We will cleanse the North, she said. Not with fire, not with banners, but with truth. Every family that traded honor for gold will answer. Every house that helped flay my kin, host the Boltons, or feed the Freys will stand before me. And if they resist, asked one old lord. Sansa looked him dead in the eyes. Then we remind them why the wolves once ruled. But the North wasn't her only concern. King's Landing had heard of her return. Cersei Lannister, now ruling with wine-soaked fists and a crown of ashes, sent a raven laced with venom. The traitor girl who killed my son now pretends to rule. The Iron Throne does not forget. You are summoned to the capital to answer for regicide, or the North will burn again. Queen Regent Cersei Lannister, protector of the realm, for now, Sansa read the letter aloud to the assembled lords of the North. Then she set it on fire. The last time we bent the knee, she said, they cut off our heads. No one objected. She had one last piece to move. Jon. She hadn't seen him since before the fall of Winterfell, since he was just her bastard brother, quiet and brooding and half a stranger. But he was at the wall still, if the rumors were true. Lord Commander now, hero of Hardhome, slayer of the dead. She didn't want him as an ally. She needed him as family. So she rode for Castle Black. With only 10 men, cloaked in gray and white, carrying no banners. She reached the wall after a week, the towering black stones rising like a judgment. They let her in, barely believing who she was. And when Jon saw her, he stopped mid-step. "Sansa," he said, his voice cracking like a frozen branch. She walked to him, stared at him for a long moment, then embraced him. They stood that way for a long time. He listened as she told him everything. Joffrey, the Vale, the Boltons, the war brewing again. He didn't ask why she killed the king. He didn't need to. "I'm not a lord, Sansa," he said. "I'm a brother of the Night's Watch. My place is here." "No," she replied softly. "Your place is with us. The Watch has done nothing but bleed for others' wars. You've given enough. The dead don't care about oaths, and neither do Lannisters." Jon didn't answer immediately, but that night he stood atop the wall and stared south, toward Winterfell, toward home. He clenched, his fists. The cold didn't touch him. By morning he gave his answer, "I'll come." And when they returned to Winterfell, side by side under a gray sky, the banners of House Stark finally flew again. The wolves were no longer scattered, and the Queen Slayer had brought her pack back home. But war was coming, not just from kings, landing, not just from traitors. Something darker stirred beyond the wall, something colder than snow, and even Sansa, hardened, powerful, reborn, would learn that not every enemy bleeds. The wind howled across the battlements of Winterfell like a warning no one wanted to hear. The snow had thickened, but the cold wasn't just in the air anymore. It was in the bones of the people. It clung to their voices, sat heavy in their silences, and whispered through the walls at night. The dead were coming, not metaphorically, not like Cersei's armies or the phrase betrayal. No, the real dead, the kind that did not bleed. Jon had changed. Sansa could see it in his eyes. He was harder now, less patient, more weary. The wall had aged him, not with time, but with terror. When he spoke of the White Walkers, he didn't try to convince. He simply warned. "The Night King is real," he told the Northern lords. "I saw him, and if we don't stand together, we will fall one by one, house by house, bone by bone." Some still didn't believe. Others were too afraid to speak. But Sansa saw the fear crawling across their faces. It was beginning to settle in. Not just fear of the dead, fear that Sansa Stark might not be enough. But Sansa had planned for that too. The grain stores were full. The forges burned night and day, crafting weapons not just of steel, but of dragon glass, shipped quietly from the wall in barrels disguised as salt. She had made deals, quiet, ruthless ones. Glover men for food, Manderly ships for secrets, even a dozen knights from Essos who owed her favors from Braavos. She ruled like a Stark, but she played like a Lannister. And every time someone asked what made her fit to lead a kingdom teetering on extinction, she answered simply, "I survived." Then came the letter. Not from Cersei, not from the Vale, not from the south at all. It came by Raven, carrying no sigil, no seal, only one sentence burned into the parchment in black. "The wall has fallen." The room went silent when Jon read it aloud. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered a prayer. Sansa stood, calm, cold. "How long?" she asked. Jon looked at her. "Days. No more than a week." Her voice didn't tremble. "Then we prepare to burn." The next 2 days were war without battle, evacuation plans, food distributions, blacksmiths pounding through the night, lookouts assigned to every hilltop, Maester Wolkan and the scribes drawing maps of potential retreat routes. though Sansa knew deep down that retreat wouldn't be enough. If Winterfell fell, the rest of the North would crumble behind it. There was no retreat from the dead. Only defiance. She didn't sleep. Not really. Just short rests by firelight, half dreaming of her mother's voice, her father's hands, Arya's laughter echoing through the old halls. She found herself wandering the crypts one night. The statues looked colder than ever. She stood before Ned's and stared at the stone face, so unlike the warmth she remembered. "You always said the North was hard," she whispered, "but you never said it would be this lonely." Behind her, Jon's voice stirred the silence. "You're not alone." She turned, unsure of what emotion was fighting to reach the surface. "I don't know if I can win this," she said. He shook his head. "You already did. You lived. You came back. You made them follow you. That's more than most kings have ever done." "But they don't need a queen now," she said bitterly. "They need a god." Jon stepped closer. "Then show them the gods still bleed." On the fifth night, the horn sounded. 3 long blasts, the signal for death. The army of the dead had reached the edge of the forest outside Winterfell. Thousands of them. Faces hollow, bodies broken. And above them, the Night King rode a dragon of ice and fireless flame. They did not scream. They did not march. They moved like a shadow swallowing the snow. And Sansa stood atop the battlements, in full black furs, her eyes fixed on the approaching dark, her voice strong as she gave her command. "Light the trenches." Flames burst across the outer perimeter, roaring high against the wind. Archers readied, fighters gripped blades. The North stood together. Not just soldiers, blacksmiths, cooks, sons, daughters. Even the old and broken took up spears. And, behind it all, at the heart of Winterfell, Sansa waited. Not as a lady, not even as a queen, but as a symbol. Because the dead had come for the world. But first, they had to go through her. The night was alive with fire and death. The trenches burned like rings of hell around Winterfell, casting shadows that danced across the snow in jagged, twitching shapes. The first wave of whites hit just before midnight, a wall of bodies, silent and relentless, clawing, climbing, throwing themselves onto the flames as if they didn't feel the burn. And maybe they didn't. From the ramparts, Sansa could see. The dead crash against the outer walls like waves. She could hear steel hitting bone, men screaming, wolves howling. She could hear Jon barking orders in the yard below, the clang of dragon glass as it shattered through brittle skulls. But she stayed above, not out of fear. Because this was her battlefield. Strategy, control, leadership. She was the brain, while the swords were the fists. Arya had once told her war wasn't about who could fight. It was about who could outlast. Tonight, they would be tested. The screams grew closer as the dead breached the first wall. A group of them made it, over a collapsed section of the outer barricade, charging the courtyard like an unholy tide. Jon and Braavos were there, blades flashing, bloodless heads rolling across the snow. Ghost lunged into them with savage fury, teeth tearing frozen flesh. Gendry, Brienne, even Tormund. They all fought like this was the last fight they'd ever have. And Sansa watched, until she couldn't just watch anymore. She descended the inner stairs, cloak billowing behind her like a shadow with purpose. Maester Wolkan tried to stop her. "My lady, please. The crypts are safer." She didn't, even slow. Safe is gone. She grabbed a dagger from the nearest armory rack, its hilt black and jagged, carved from pure dragon glass. She tied her hair back and stepped into the chaos. And for a moment, the dead paused, as if even they recognized her. As if the cold itself respected the rage coiled inside her. She fought like she had lived, not with brute strength, but with precision and control. She didn't swing wild. She waited, dodged, struck exactly where she needed to. One white came at her too fast. She ducked, shoved the blade under its chin, and twisted until it crumbled in her arms. Another grabbed her cloak. She slipped out, stabbed it in the spine. She wasn't a warrior. She didn't need to be. She was a Stark, and she was done hiding. The dead kept coming, and above them all the Night King watched, perched on the back. A Viserion, wings spread wide, eyes glowing like twin moons. He didn't command. He didn't speak. He simply pointed. And Winterfell burned. The walls cracked. The towers groaned. Fires lit the sky like fallen stars. But the north did not break. Jon reached the Godswood with Sam and Arya, where Bran waited. Still, silent, bait for a god. The plan was to trap the Night King there. To kill him. End it all. Sansa couldn't follow. She had one last duty. In the Great Hall, the civilians had barricaded themselves, the old, the young, the wounded. She stepped in, covered in ash and blood, eyes wild but focused. "Arm them," she said. "But they're not fighters," the steward stammered. "They are now." She opened the crates of dragon glass blades herself, handing them out, even to children old enough to walk. "You think the dead will show mercy?" she said. "They didn't to your brothers, or your mothers, or to mine." No one spoke after that, just the sound of weapons sliding into trembling hands. And then it happened. A scream echoed across Winterfell that didn't sound like a scream at all. It was a roar, guttural and final, not from a man, not from a beast, from something ending. Arya had done it. Somehow, impossibly, with the wind at her back and vengeance in her veins, she had leapt from the shadows and plunged Valyrian steel into the Night King's chest. And just like that, he shattered. All of them did. The whites dropped like broken puppets. The wind stopped. The cold backed away. And for the first time in years, Winterfell was silent. Sansa stood in the middle of the courtyard, surrounded by the dead, truly dead now. The fires crackled. Smoke curled into the sky. Men sobbed. Some prayed. Others dropped to their knees, too tired to understand they were still alive. She didn't cry. She didn't fall. She just looked up at the stars breaking through the smoke and whispered, "Thank you." By dawn, the bodies were being burned. Jon and Arya stood beside her as pyres were built. Sam limped past, bleeding and alive. Gendry held his shoulder. Brienne sat on a bench, too tired to speak. The cost had been high, thousands dead, dozens of houses gutted, half of Winterfell in ruin. But the north was still standing, and it stood behind her. Weeks later, when the word of their survival reached King's Landing, Cersei sent no raven. She knew what had happened. That the girl she'd tried to chain, to humiliate, to erase, had lived. Had killed her son, had burned her monsters, had led a kingdom through death itself, and now ruled a north stronger than ever. They called her many things in the songs that followed. The Wolf Queen, the Queen Slayer, the Flame in the Snow, the Yatsa Lady who never bent. But Sansa Stark didn't care about the songs. She stood on the walls of Winterfell, wind in her hair, scars on her skin, power in her silence. And when she looked south, she no longer felt fear, only hunger. Because the last war was coming, and this time she would start it.